He had exactly 48 hours to save her life. Not with a weapon. Not with money. But with the truth he had buried so deep, he had almost convinced himself it never existed. The envelope had arrived on a Tuesday morning, no return address, no stamp, just her name written in red ink across the front. Inside was a single photograph. Thema standing outside her office building, laughing, completely unaware. And underneath it, 3 words scrawled in Korean, Gapsul Sijak Hey, time to repay. She didn't know what it meant. She handed it to him with a casual smile, thinking it was some kind of promotional material she couldn't read. And he stood there, holding the thing that could unravel everything, and smiled back at her like his entire world wasn't caving in. Because the debt wasn't hers. It was his. And the man collecting it, the man who had sent that photograph, was someone Kang Minho had spent the last 3 years pretending did not exist. Welcome to the debt he couldn't repay. If you are new here, this is Afro-Korean Stories, where love is never simple, and the truth always costs something. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications because trust me, you do not want to miss how this ends. Now let's get into it. Thema Omenka was not the kind of woman who waited for things to happen to her. She had grown up in Accra watching her mother run a fabric business from a second-floor apartment with no air conditioning and 5 children under one roof, and somewhere between her mother's early mornings and her late nights, Thema had decided that ambition was the only language the world truly respected. She had moved to Seoul at 24 on a design scholarship, graduated at the top of her program, and by 28 she was the creative director of Hanul Interiors, one of the most sought-after interior architecture firms in the city. She was precise. She was disciplined. She did not fall in love easily. Which made what happened with Kang Minho all the more inconvenient. They had met at an industry event 18 months ago. She had been presenting a proposal. He had been standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed, and that expression she later learned meant he was deeply interested in something but would rather die than show it. He was not the most handsome man she had ever seen, but there was something about the way he held himself, like he had already calculated every exit in the room and simply decided not to use any of them. Like he had chosen to stay. For her. He had approached her afterward and said, without any preamble, that her presentation was the most intellectually honest design concept he had encountered in 3 years. She had looked him straight in the eye and said, "Only 3 years? Your benchmark is embarrassingly low." He had laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one, surprised out of him like something he hadn't planned, and that was it. That was the thing. 18 months later, they were living together in a modest apartment in Mapogu, and Thema had reorganized her entire emotional architecture around this man. Not because he was perfect. He was complicated and private, and sometimes he went quiet in a way that felt like a door closing softly, and she never fully knew what was behind it. But he loved her with a steadiness she had never experienced before, the kind of love that didn't announce itself loudly but was simply always there, like load-bearing support hidden inside a wall. She had not told her family yet. That was its own story entirely. But she was happy. She was genuinely, terrifyingly happy. And then the envelope arrived. Minho had not slept the night after she handed it to him. He had waited until she was in the bath, then sat at the kitchen table and stared at the photograph for a long time. His hands were completely still on the table surface. That was the thing about Minho, he had trained himself not to react externally, a habit built over years in corporate finance where any visible emotion was a vulnerability that someone would eventually exploit. He had learned to process everything inward, quietly and completely, before deciding how to respond. But inward, right now, he was burning. The handwriting belonged to Im Jae-hyuk. And Im Jae-hyuk should not, by any rational calculation of circumstances, know that Thema Omenka existed. Minho pulled out his phone and opened a contact he had not called in over 2 years. The name saved was just a single initial, J. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, smooth and amused, like a man who had been expecting the call all evening and had enjoyed the wait. Minho. The voice was warm in the way a blade is warm after it has been inside something. It's been a while. How do you know about her? It was not a question. Minho's voice was flat, stripped of everything. A brief pause. Then, she's beautiful, by the way. Very striking. I can see why you've been so distracted. Jae-hyuk. The name came out like a warning pressed between clenched teeth. Relax. I'm not threatening your girlfriend. I'm simply reminding you that you have an outstanding obligation. 3 years is a long time to forget something like that, don't you think? Minho pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of his nose, his eyes closing for exactly 1 second. We agreed that was settled. We agreed on terms that you did not fulfill. Your signature is on a document that says exactly that. Would you like me to refresh your memory about the specifics, or would you prefer to come and have a conversation like adults? The bath water had stopped running. Minho could hear Thema moving around the bathroom, the soft sounds of her routine, completely unaware. He kept his voice low and even. Don't contact her. Don't go near her. Whatever this is, it stays between us. Of course, Jae-hyuk said pleasantly. Meet me Thursday. The usual place. Come alone. And Minho, don't make me send another envelope. The line went dead. Minho sat for a moment longer, perfectly still, jaw tight. Then he stood, slid the envelope inside his jacket, walked toward the trash, and stopped. He couldn't throw it away. Evidence. He tucked it inside a book on the highest shelf instead, spine facing the wall, like burying something he wasn't ready to name. When Thema came out of the bathroom in his oversized shirt, hair wrapped in a towel, she found him pouring her a glass of water like nothing had happened. His expression was neutral, arranged, exactly as she expected it to look. She padded across the kitchen floor and reached for the glass. Her eyes moved across his face, that careful, architectural reading she always did, looking for the load-bearing thing underneath the surface. You okay? She asked. Tired, he said. He handed her the water and held her gaze without blinking. She almost let it go. Almost. You've been weird since I gave you that letter thing. He met her eyes directly. It was junk mail, Thema. I threw it out. She watched him for a second too long, her head tilting very slightly, that small tell she had when something wasn't adding up in her mind. Then she took a sip of the water and said nothing. But she had noticed the way his jaw tightened when he first looked at the envelope. The way his thumb had moved across it once, slowly, deliberately, before his expression went blank. She had noticed. She always noticed. She just hadn't decided yet what to do about it. The next 2 days were a performance. Minho went to work. He reviewed quarterly assessments, sat through 3 meetings, had lunch with a colleague from the risk management team. He was present in the way that very disciplined people can be present, physically exact, emotionally somewhere else entirely. At home, he cooked dinner twice. He asked about her project, a new restaurant concept she was designing in Itaewon that was frustrating her because the client kept shifting the brief. He listened. He made her laugh. He touched her face before she fell asleep and lay in the dark afterward staring at the ceiling, running calculations he didn't want to run. The debt was real. He had never pretended otherwise to himself, only to the world. 3 years ago, when Minho's investment firm stood on the edge of collapse, Jae-hyuk had appeared with a lifeline extended. Not out of generosity, Jae-hyuk did not do generosity. He did transactions. He had offered Minho a private loan, large, quiet, structured entirely off official records, in exchange for a future favor to be named at Jae-hyuk's complete discretion. At the time, Minho had been desperate. He had employees who trusted him. He had clients who depended on him. He had a reputation built across a decade, and he had watched it standing at the edge of a cliff. And Jae-hyuk had appeared with a hand extended. He had taken it. He rebuilt the firm. He repaid the financial portion within 14 months, ahead of schedule. Then he quietly, methodically extracted himself from every professional circle that connected him to Jae-hyuk, changed his phone number twice, and convinced himself that a man like Jae-hyuk had larger things to chase than one settled debt. He had been wrong. Thursday arrived. The usual place was a private members' restaurant in Gangnam, the kind with no signage outside, a menu that changed weekly, and a clientele that spent considerable energy ensuring their presence was never photographed. Minho arrived 8 minutes early, ordered water, and waited with his hands loose on the table. Jae-hyuk arrived exactly on time, which was itself a message. He was 41, lean, with the kind of face that photographs well and the kind of eyes that revealed the face was a professional instrument rather than a reflection of anything real. He wore a gray suit, no tie, and carried the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life entered a room where he wasn't the most powerful person present. He sat across from Minho and smiled, warm, unhurried, like they were old friends catching up over nothing. "You look tired," he said. "Skip it," Minho said. His voice was flat. "What do you want?" Jae-hyuk poured himself water from the carafe, unhurried, owning every second of the silence. "Do you know what I've been doing for the last 3 years, Minho? Since you so elegantly disappeared from my orbit?" "I don't care. I've been expanding." He said it the way another man might describe redecorating. "Significantly. Real estate. Private logistics. Entertainment. I even have a small stake in a design firm." A pause, deliberate, waited. "Isn't that a coincidence?" Minho went very still. His hand stayed flat on the table but something behind his eyes sharpened to a point. "It's not Hanul," Jae-hyuk said, reading the thought precisely. "Not yet. But I am in conversations with several firms about a major commercial development. A government-adjacent contract. The kind that makes careers." He let that settle. "Or ends them, depending on who gets it." "Say what you're actually saying." Jae-hyuk set down his glass. "I need an introduction. There is a government liaison I've been trying to reach for 6 months. Director Baek Jong-woo. You know him. You sat on the same advisory board for 2 years. I want a meeting." Minho stared at him. "That's it?" "That's it. One introduction. One meeting arranged. Your name opens the door, I walk through it, and we are finished. The document gets destroyed. Whatever existed between us, gone." It sounded almost reasonable. That was what unsettled Minho most. "Baek Jong-woo is a public servant," Minho said carefully. "If you're using that connection for anything that isn't clean. I'm not asking you to do anything except make a phone call." Jae-hyuk's voice stayed pleasant, like a man explaining something obvious to someone he was choosing to be patient with. "What happens in the room after that is not your concern. It becomes my concern when my name is attached to the introduction." Jae-hyuk tilted his head, a small, almost sympathetic movement. "Then you'll need to decide what matters more to you. Your professional ethics," he let that land like a stone dropped into still water, "or the life you've built with the woman in that photograph." The temperature in the room shifted perceptibly. "I told you," Minho said, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolute, "that she is not part of this. And she doesn't have to be." Jae-hyuk stood, smoothing his jacket with both hands, unhurried, already done with the conversation. "That is entirely your choice." He reached into his breast pocket and set a business card on the table between them. "My new number. Use it." He left without looking back. Not once. Minho sat there after he was gone, staring at the card on the white tablecloth. His jaw tightened once, then released. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Then he picked up the card, slid it into his pocket, and walked out into the gray Seoul afternoon feeling like a man standing at a crossroads where both roads led somewhere he didn't want to go. He almost told her that night. She was at the kitchen counter sketching. She did that sometimes in the evenings, not design work, just drawing for herself. Abstract shapes that she said helped her think. He stood in the doorway watching her, and the urge to simply say it, to sit down across from her and lay every single piece of it on the table and let her decide what to do, was almost overwhelming. But then he thought about what it would mean. She would know he had borrowed money from a man like Jae-hyuk. She would know he had hidden it. She would know that for 18 months of their relationship, this thing had lived beneath the surface, quiet and corrosive, and he had chosen silence. He knew Thema. He knew what would hurt her most was not the danger. It was the silence. She looked up. Her eyes found him immediately, reading his face the way she read structural drawings, looking for what wasn't labeled. You're standing there like you have something to say. I was just thinking, he said. He moved into the kitchen and opened the fridge. You think loud, she said, returning to her sketch. It's actually one of your more irritating qualities. He almost smiled. What are you drawing? She turned the sketchbook toward him. A series of interconnected geometric shapes, precise, but somehow organic at the edges. Like a city viewed from directly above. It's how this situation with the restaurant client feels, she said. All these elements that should connect naturally but don't, because someone keeps moving the anchor point. He looked at the drawing for a moment. What do you do when the anchor point keeps moving? She picked up her pencil again, eyes back on the page. You stop trying to build around where it currently is. You go back to the load-bearing structure. Figure out what actually holds everything up, and you work from that. She wasn't talking about the restaurant anymore. They both knew it. He set down the glass he had taken from the fridge and said, very quietly, Thema. She looked up. Her eyes were steady, waiting. There's something I need to. Her phone rang. The sound cut through the moment like a blade. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted, that specific mix of love and complicated responsibility she reserved for one caller. It's my mother. She said it with the sigh that meant the conversation would be equal parts warmth and exhaustion. She picked up the phone and stepped toward the living room, her voice switching seamlessly into Chui as she answered, her whole body language softening and tightening simultaneously in the way it always did for home. Minho stood in the kitchen alone. The moment had closed. And some part of him, the cowardly part, the part he hated when he examined it clearly, was relieved. The call from her mother lasted 45 minutes. Thema came back to the kitchen afterward looking like she had been quietly, thoroughly wrung out and put back together at a slightly different angle. She set her phone face down on the counter. She wants me to come home for Uncle Kofi's retirement ceremony next month, she said. She opened the fridge, stared into it without taking anything, then closed it. She also spent 20 minutes explaining to me, very patiently, that I am 29 years old and the only one of her children who has not yet produced a grandchild, and that this is both a personal tragedy and a direct offense to her. What did you say? I told her I was focused on my career. She leaned against the counter. She said, and I am quoting exactly, Thema, your career cannot hold you at night. Minho was quiet for a beat. Then, she's not wrong. Thema turned to look at him with an expression that lived precisely between exhaustion and amusement. Don't take her side. I'm not taking her side. I'm just saying, he moved toward her, and something in the movement was different tonight, more deliberate, closing a distance he had been maintaining too carefully. He reached out and tucked a loose braid behind her ear, his hand staying against the side of her face, warm and still. She's not wrong that you deserve someone who holds you. Her expression shifted, the amusement giving way to something quieter and more exposed. Minho. I know, he said. I know I've been somewhere else this week. I'm sorry. She studied his face, that slow, careful reading. Her chin lifted slightly, like she was deciding something. Where have you been? Here, he said. Just underneath something. It was the closest to honest he had come. She seemed to feel the weight of it, because she leaned her forehead against his chest, a small surrender, voluntary and deliberate, and he wrapped both arms around her and held on. The kitchen was very quiet. Whatever it is, she said into his shirt, her voice muffled but clear, you can tell me. You know that. He pressed his lips to the top of her head and said nothing. She pulled back and looked up at him, eyes searching his directly. I mean it, Minho. I'm not fragile. Whatever it is. I know you're not fragile, he said. He kissed her forehead. Then her cheek. When she tilted her face up slowly, eyes still open, watching him, he kissed her mouth, careful and deliberate, like she was something he could not afford to be careless with. And the conversation dissolved into something wordless and warm, and he held onto her the way a man holds onto the one structural element he cannot afford to lose. He still didn't tell her. But lying awake again in the dark afterward, listening to her breathe beside him, he made a decision, quiet and firm and final. He was not going to make the call to Baek Jong-woo. He was not going to use his reputation to open a door for a man he didn't trust into a room that could cause damage no one could control. He would find another way around Jae-hyuk. He always found a way. He was still telling himself this when his phone buzzed on the nightstand at 2:47 a.m. He picked it up. Unknown number, new number, but he knew immediately. Asterisk check your professional email. Just a preview of what happens if you say no. No hard feelings, Minho asterisk. He sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Thema, and carried his laptop to the dark hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind him. The email was addressed to him. Anonymous sender. The attachment was a scanned copy of the original loan agreement, his signature sitting at the bottom, clear as a confession written in his own hand. Below the scan, a typed note, asterisk this goes to your board of directors, the Financial Services Commission, and 3 financial journalists at 6 a.m. Friday unless I hear from you by midnight Thursday. He read it twice. Then he set the laptop on the hallway floor, sat with his back against the wall and his knees up, hands hanging loose between them, and stared at nothing. The document, if released, would not destroy him legally. The loan had been fully repaid. But the optics of an undisclosed private arrangement with Jae-hyuk, a man whose expanding empire was beginning to attract the kind of quiet regulatory attention that precedes very loud consequences, would be catastrophic. His institutional clients would exit within weeks. His advisory board positions would disappear. The reputation he had rebuilt brick by careful brick over 3 years would take exactly one news cycle to come completely apart. And Thema would read it in the news. From a stranger. Before he had ever said a single word. That was the part he couldn't survive. He opened a response to Jae-hyuk. Typed 3 sentences. Deleted them. Typed again. Stopped. He sat in the dark hallway for a full hour, moving back and forth across a line he had told himself he would never approach. Then he closed the laptop without sending anything and went back to the bedroom. Thema was still sleeping, one arm extended across his side of the bed, reaching even in her sleep, without knowing she was doing it. He stood in the doorway looking at her for a long moment. Then he went to the highest shelf and retrieved the envelope. He called his lawyer at 8 in the morning. Choi Eun-jae was sharp and meticulous, a woman who had managed his firm's legal framework for 6 years and possessed the particular skill of listening to complicated situations without allowing her face to reveal a single thing she was thinking. She listened to all of it without interrupting. The loan. Jae-hyuk. The meeting in Gangnam. The email at 2:47 a.m. The 48-hour ultimatum. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. You should have told me about the loan when you took it, she said. I know. The document itself isn't illegal. Irregular, yes. The lack of disclosure is the vulnerability. Another pause. The question is whether Jae-hyuk actually intends to detonate it, or whether this is purely leverage. It's leverage, Minho said. He needs the Baek introduction. He needs me cooperative. Which means he won't use it while negotiations are still open. She paused again, thinking. The problem is, once you provide the introduction, the leverage doesn't disappear. It simply changes shape. You become more exposed, not less. I know that. So what do you want to do? He thought about Thema's drawing, the anchor point that kept moving. He thought about load-bearing structures. He thought about what she had said without saying it directly. I want to get ahead of it, he said. Before he does. Eun-jae was quiet again. That is a significant decision. And it will be painful. Can you help me manage it? Yes, she said. But Minho, if you're going to do this, it cannot be strategic or partial. It has to be complete. Every version of this that collapses does so because someone disclosed halfway and left gaps for other people to fill. Complete, he said. Understood. He hung up. Sat for one moment. Then he called his board chair, Oh Sungmin. It was the worst professional conversation of his life. He spoke for 20 minutes and answered difficult questions for 40 more, and by the end he felt like he had been turned entirely inside out and examined under light. Oh Sungmin went very quiet at the end of it, the specific quiet of a man processing disappointment rather than anger, which was somehow considerably worse. You should have come to me, he said. I know. You had other options available. I know. A long silence. We will need to conduct a proper review. There will be conditions attached. I understand. And this Jae-hyuk situation, if he escalates, we go to our legal team and to the regulators. Not after the fact. First. Yes. Minho. Oh Sungmin's voice shifted, less formal now, something closer to the way a mentor sounds when he is genuinely disappointed rather than professionally concerned. You've built something real here. Don't let the fear of protecting it become the very thing that destroys it. After he hung up, Minho sat in his car in the parking structure outside his office building and did not move for 15 minutes. His hands rested on his thighs, his eyes on the concrete wall ahead, processing the weight of what he had just done and what it was going to cost before things got better. Then he drove home. Thema was there. She was supposed to be at a client meeting in Itaewon. Instead she was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her work bag still on her shoulder, like she had walked in and simply stopped. Like something had told her to stay. She looked up the moment he came through the door. Her eyes moved across his face, quick and thorough, and immediately something in her expression changed. She closed her laptop. What happened? She said. He set his keys on the counter. He didn't take off his jacket. He stood across the kitchen table from her and for the first time in days, the calculating part of his brain went completely quiet. There was nothing left to calculate. He had already made every move available to him. What remained now was simply the truth, which had been sitting here the entire time, waiting with more patience than he deserved. The envelope you gave me, he said. It wasn't junk mail. She didn't move. Her hands went flat on the table. He told her. All of it. From the beginning, the near collapse of the firm, the desperate choice he had made, the loan from Jae-hyuk and the terms attached to it, the repayment, the 3 years of deliberate distance. The photograph of her standing outside her office building, laughing, unaware. The restaurant in Gangnam and everything Jae-hyuk had said across that white tablecloth. The email at 2:47 a.m. The call to Eun-jae. The call to Oh Sungmin. What he had decided. What it was going to cost. He told her that he had almost told her on Tuesday night in this exact kitchen. That he had almost told her while she was on the phone with her mother. That he had lain awake 2 nights not because he didn't trust her but because he was afraid, not of what Jae-hyuk would do, but of what she would see when she looked at him after knowing everything. When he finished, the kitchen was completely still. Thema had not moved throughout. She sat perfectly, carefully still, her hands flat on the table, fingers slightly spread. Her jaw was tight but her eyes were working, processing, moving through everything he had said the way she moved through a flawed structural plan, looking for every load-bearing point, testing each one. Then she looked away from him. Out the window. The afternoon light outside was flat and gray. Her chin lifted slightly, that involuntary reflex of pride keeping her upright when something had landed hard. When she looked back, her eyes were steady. But the steadiness was costing her something visible. He could see exactly what it cost. He had a photograph of me, she said. Her voice was completely even. Controlled in a way that was not calm. Outside my office. Yes. And you said nothing. Yes. She looked away again briefly, jaw shifting, one hand coming up to her collarbone for just a second before dropping back to the table. Then she looked at him directly. How long, she said. How long what? How long have you been managing things around me? Her voice didn't rise. It dropped instead, quieter and more precise. Making decisions about what I can handle. Deciding what version of the situation I get to see. The question landed differently than he expected, not as accusation but as something older and more personal. Something she had been carrying quietly, longer than just this week. Thema. I need you to hear what I'm actually asking. She pressed both palms flat on the table, composing herself. I am not angry that you had a difficult moment 3 years ago. I am not angry that you made a bad deal when you were desperate. I understand desperation. I have done hard things under pressure. Every person who has built something from nothing has done hard things. She paused, collecting herself. What I am asking is whether you have been, this entire time, deciding what version of yourself I get to see. And if that is true, I need to understand it. Because I have been loving someone I believed I knew completely. And I need to know if I actually do. He didn't reach for an easy answer. He knew better than that with her. I think, he said carefully, that I have been afraid. Not of you. Of the version of myself that needed that loan. I left that person behind deliberately, and bringing him back into the room felt like losing ground I had fought very hard to hold. But I'm in the room, she said quietly. I have always been in the room. And I deserve to be fully in it. He said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say. I'm not leaving, she said. Her voice was steady but something in it thinned slightly, just at the edges. I want you to understand that first. I'm not going anywhere right now. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, resetting. But what you did, even with the best intentions, is a form of lying. And I cannot love someone who edits himself to protect me from reality. That is not protection, Minho. That is management. And I am not a project. Each sentence landed exactly where it was supposed to. You're right, he said. Completely. She stood up. Picked up her work bag. Set it back down, the movement sharp and controlled. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him for a moment, looking out at the gray city. Her shoulders rose once, then dropped. Then she turned around. Okay, she said. The word was a decision settling into place. What happens now with Jae-hyuk? He blinked. The shift was so clean it almost caught him off guard. My lawyer is handling the disclosure to the board. If Jae-hyuk releases the document now, we've already preempted it. It weakens his leverage significantly. And the introduction he wants? Baek Jong-woo? I'm not doing it. She studied him, head slightly tilted, reading him. Even though saying no may still cost you professionally? Even then. She was quiet. Then, good. She pulled out her phone, looked at something briefly, set it down. He's going to push back. I know. What does your lawyer think he does when the leverage stops working? She thinks he moves on. Men like Jae-hyuk don't spend resources on situations that stop being productive. Thema nodded slowly. And what do you think? Minho looked at her, this woman who had redirected from her own pain to operational clarity in less than 2 minutes. Not because she wasn't hurting. He could see that she was. But because she understood that the situation required managing, and she was not someone who let sentiment block the work. This was exactly who she was. I think he's not done, Minho said. I think the introduction was step 1 of something larger. And whatever comes next, he'll find a different angle. Thema sat back down slowly, a decision, not a collapse. She folded her arms on the table and looked at him with the expression she wore when she was about to rearrange something. Then we need to understand what that angle is before he uses it. She paused. Who else was present when the original loan was arranged? Anyone who might be a source for him? Someone he could use to apply pressure from a completely different direction? Minho stared at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. I expected you to be angrier. I am angry, she said simply, her eyes direct. I'm furious. I'm also sitting across from a man I love who is in a situation that is going to get significantly worse before it gets better, and my anger will still exist tomorrow. She held his gaze. This needs handling now. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his chest, not relief exactly. Something more complicated and more deserved. There is one person, he said slowly. A former colleague. Shin Dowan. He was present when the loan was arranged. He left the firm afterward. We didn't separate on good terms. Why not? He tried to warn me. He told me taking Jae-hyuk's money was a mistake. Minho paused, the weight of it visible in his expression. I didn't listen. Where is he now? Busan, I think. He started something of his own. Thema was already pulling her phone out. Then find him. Because if Jae-hyuk is building something, he will look for people with standing grievances. A former colleague who warned you and was ignored is exactly the kind of person who looks useful when you're trying to construct pressure from a new direction. She was already 3 moves ahead. Minho felt something shift, not relief, but the sharp recognition of what he had nearly lost by keeping her outside the conversation. The cost of his silence, laid out plainly. Thema, he said. She looked up. I'm sorry. Not because it helps the situation. Not as strategy. He held her gaze and let it be exactly what it was. I'm sorry. You deserved better than what I gave you this week. She held his eyes for a long moment. That careful reading, checking it the way she checked everything. Then something in her face moved. The operational steadiness softened at the edges, and the real emotion came through briefly, visible and unguarded. I know, she said quietly. We'll talk about it properly later. A beat. When this is handled. She opened her laptop. Back to work, but the space between them had rearranged itself. Something had been set down and something else picked up. He reached for his phone and started looking for Shin Dowan. If you are still here, good. Because this is the part where everything is about to get considerably more complicated. Before we continue, do me a favor, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me what you think Jae-hyuk's real plan is, and if you haven't subscribed to Afro-Korean Stories yet, do it now. We are just getting started. He found Dowan in 40 minutes. A small financial consulting practice in Busan, nothing large, but clean and legitimate. Minho stared at the contact listing for a moment. Then he called. It rang twice. Shin Dowan speaking. Dowan. A pause. It's Minho. The silence that followed carried years of unsettled history inside it, the specific weight of things said too late and warnings given too early. I wondered, Dowan said finally, how long it would take. Minho frowned. You already know why I'm calling. Jae-hyuk contacted me 6 weeks ago. Dowan's voice was measured, not warm, but not hostile either. Careful. He framed it professionally. Said he was building a business partnership and wanted background on former associates. Did you tell him anything? No. A beat. I'm not an idiot, Minho. I knew what he was doing the moment he started asking. Another pause, shorter, heavier. I also know I should have called you 6 weeks ago when it happened. I didn't. Honestly? I wasn't sure you deserved the warning. The honesty hit like cold water, clean and uncomfortable. Did he approach you again after that? Twice. I stopped taking his calls. Dowan's voice shifted slightly. What has he done? Minho told him. The condensed version, the photograph, the Gangnam meeting, the email at 2:47 a.m., the ultimatum, the preemptive disclosure to his board. When he finished, Dowan was quiet for several seconds. You went to your board first, he said. Before he could release it. Yes. A breath. Something that sounded like reluctant, genuine respect. That was the right call. A pause. What do you need from me specifically? I need to know exactly what questions he asked you. What information he was trying to build. If I understand what he was constructing, I can anticipate where he moves next. That's going to be a long conversation. I know. I'll come to Busan if necessary. A longer silence. Come, Dawan said finally. Bring whoever needs to be in the room. This isn't a two-person conversation. A beat. And Minho, for what it's worth, I should have fought harder to stop you back then. I said my piece once and walked away. That's on me too. Minho stared at the window. The gray afternoon light was fading. No, he said quietly. It isn't. He was still on the phone when Thema set a cup of coffee beside his elbow without a word. He looked up at her. She pointed at the coffee, then at him, her expression saying drink it without interrupting a single syllable. He kept talking to Dawan. But his free hand reached out and covered hers for one moment before she pulled away, a small, unhurried thing. She went back to her laptop across the table. He watched her from the corner of his eye, pulling something up, cross-referencing, her brows slightly creased. Working. With him, not around him. He ended the call and looked across the table at her. Dawan has an appointment in Seoul next week, he said. He's coming up. He wants to sit down, all of us together. Thema looked up. All of us? You, me, him, and Eun-jae. He paused. If you're willing to be in the room. She tilted her head slightly, that small movement she made when she was weighing something. You want me in the room? I want you in the room, he said. I should have wanted that from the beginning. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to her screen. I'll clear my Thursday, she said. That night they sat on the couch, not in the performed closeness of the last 2 days, but the real kind. The kind that has room for silence and doesn't feel the need to fill it. Her legs were across his lap. His hand rested on her ankle, warm and still. The television was on but neither of them was watching it. After a long while, she said, my mother would have a complete episode if she knew any of this. He almost laughed. Which part specifically? All of it. She shook her head slowly. Envelope with a threatening photograph. Secret meetings in Gangnam. Loan from a powerful man with bad intentions. She exhaled. She would actually combust. She would blame me entirely. Oh, completely. You would be the permanent villain in that story. A pause. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the television without seeing it. Then the corner of her mouth gave way, just slightly. She'd also somehow connect all of it back to the grandchildren conversation. This time he did laugh, short and genuine and surprised out of him. She looked at him when he laughed. Her expression was still tired, still layered with everything the day had cost her. But her eyes were warm. When this is over, she said, the warmth settling back into something serious, you and I are going to have a different kind of conversation. About what this actually looks like going forward. The real version. Not the managed version. I know. I mean it, Minho. No more edited rooms. No more edited rooms, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, checking it, testing the weight of it the way she tested everything. Then she seemed to find what she needed, because she settled back and looked at the television again. Okay, she said. Outside, Seoul moved the way it always did, loud and lit and completely indifferent to what was happening in one quiet apartment in Mapogu. Somewhere across the city, Im Jae-hyuk was already adjusting his calculations, accounting for variables he hadn't anticipated, selecting his next angle with the patience of a man who had never once been in a hurry when the outcome was already decided in his mind. And somewhere in Busan, Shin Dawan was sitting with 6 weeks of careful mental notes about the questions a dangerous man had asked him, preparing to lay all of it on a table in Seoul next Thursday. And Minho's board was convening a quiet review that would determine the shape of everything he had built for the next several years. All of it still in motion. All of it unresolved. But here, on this couch, in this apartment, with this woman's feet in his lap and the specific silence of 2 people who have survived one hard conversation and know there are harder ones ahead, this moment was solid. They were solid. The debt he owed Jae-hyuk might eventually be settled. But there was another debt, quieter, older, and far more important, the one he owed to the woman sitting beside him, who had chosen to stay when staying cost her something real. He didn't know yet what that repayment looked like. But for the first time in 3 days, he was willing, genuinely willing, to find out. And somewhere across the city, Jae-hyuk set his phone down on his desk, picked up a different one, and made a call that Minho knew nothing about. To someone Thema trusted completely. If you made it to the end of part 1, you are exactly who this channel was built for. Now I need 3 things from you right now. Smash that like button, drop a comment below telling me who you think Jae-hyuk just called, because that ending is not an accident, and if you are not yet subscribed to Afro-Korean Stories, fix that immediately. Hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. Part 2 of the debt he couldn't repay is coming, and that Thursday meeting is going to change absolutely everything. Don't miss it.